I remember one very, very remarkable congressional hearing that I attended in D.C. on the NAGPRA legislation. It was being chaired by the representative from Guam, and the room was packed with Native people, Native Hawaiians, indigenous people from the other 48 states. A man and a woman who were collectors. That's what they did. That was their business. They were collectors. Sat down to testify and were complaining to the congressman from Guam. They were going to lose money if NAGPRA was passed. And the man gave as an example the fact that he could get $10,000 for a buckskin shirt, a man's buckskin shirt that was decorated with human hair and ermine tails and porcupine quill work, and that he stood to lose $10,000 if NAGPRA was passed because he wouldn't be able to sell it because it came from a dead person. And that dead person's dried blood could still be seen around the bullet hole in his shirt. And this wonderful congressman from Guam, after they were finished talking, he said, okay, he said, I'm going to take off my congressman's hat now, and I'm going to set it off to the side here. And I'm going to pick up my, and then he used a word in his language to describe his traditional chief's headdress. And I've got that on now, he said. You should not be doing what you're doing. I have no sympathy for you and your $10,000. And let me tell you, that room erupted.
We were all wounded at wounded.
In regard to the Missouri River, my name is Sose. I'd like to ask the Corps of Engineers a question.
That the Corps of Engineers chose to operate the river in such a way that it removed all of the dirt and exposed our ancestors.
This new master manual, you'll see the impacts of having that document every year, beginning this year, because that guides everybody's expectations of how the system is to be operated. There are measurements that are taken in March and July as to the levels of the reservoirs, and when those measurements are made, you go to kind of the master manual and it says, well, if you're at this level, this is what you do.
A human skull. You can't mistake a human skull.
And it impacts how much hydropower is made, and it impacts the water that's released for navigation, and it's, all of those things are sort of governed by the manual.
That is not right.
We just want these holy places left alone. We just want them protected. We just want something for the generations to come. If our homelands define us, if they have defined us and told us who we are, told us who we belong to, told us where we come from, our children and grandchildren and generations to come need to have that same foundation if they're going to be able to stand strong. And they are going to be able to stand strong because they are going to have that same foundation, because we are fighting to make that happen. And it's going to happen. And it took us 3 years to negotiate a memorandum of agreement, which is a legally binding document. It's an agreement between the Omaha District of the Army Corps and the North Dakota tribes concerning the treatment of our dead. And after 3 years, we had a memorandum of agreement written largely by the tribal representatives that provides for the protection of unmarked Native burials in the entire Omaha district. If a Native burial is opened through erosion, through development, through looting, or otherwise endangered, they have to notify our tribes within 24 hours if this burial is associated with one of our tribes. We make the decision as to whether or not that burial can be backfilled and stabilized and left in place, or if it has to come out of the ground in order to protect the contents of the burial. Gone are the days when United States Army Corps archaeologists just go and excavate that burial and cart the contents back to their labs. No more. No more. It doesn't happen anymore. We stopped it. You know, if people really want to learn about Native people, that's the kind of education that they need. And though it's exhausting and though it's frustrating, you know, lots of Native people see the worth, see the that it's worthy to do this kind of education based on our values, based on our beliefs, based on our teachings and instructions, because we're talking about our sites, and that's the way that they have to be managed, is through the values of the people who created those sites. You see what I'm saying? That's the only and best way to take care of them. And so to make sure that that happened where unmarked Native burials on Omaha District Army Corps lands are concerned, we elbowed our way to that table. We dragged the Corps, kicking and screaming, into that agreement. They did not want to give up any power and control over anything that happens on their lands, but they were forced to do so. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. And it was the only thing we could think of to do to stem the tide of the continual and wholesale mining of our dead.
So as a citizen, the scary part is lots of government agencies have the right of eminent domain, and if it's going to serve a public purpose. But if you can take whole tribal communities and impact them without their consultation and without ultimately paying them just compensation. So that's the scary part to me as a citizen, that could happen in this country.
At one time, 2,300 miles of the mini Sose ran free from Montana all the way to the Mississippi, providing 28 tribes with not only water, but a sacred cultural resource.
The Corps of Engineers, as a federal agency, has a tremendous responsibility to the tribes in its district footprint.
My grandfather died when he was 74 in 1940. At that time he told me, grandson, all of you gather around me. He said, when we first signed the peace treaty, Gabby promised us many things. I'm still waiting. And he died waiting. The promises was to were made to my people. And is it going to be the same way?
I just want to say, that the Lakota people have experienced a lot of devastation in their land losses and the things that have happened to us to try to alienate us from our own culture and tradition. And the end result is what we are facing here today.
But our people are made up of all different reservations. Myself, I have a grandfather that was from Pine Ridge, another one from Standing Rock, and another one from Lower Brew, another one from Siston, and also Yankton. 5 different tribes. And I come from the warrior society, war chiefs. My grandfather's Standing Buffalo, Black Eagle, Inquaduta, most of you know Inquaduta. He was a warrior that fought for his country, his land. He only signed one peace treaty way back in 1851.
If we owned all the land that we lost in treaties, we would be a rich people, but we live in poverty. Our unemployment rate, I think they say, is at 85%. And our people live in poverty, the great majority, and it affects all of us. It affects our children. It affects everyone. We have alcoholism at epidemic proportions, diabetes at epidemic proportions. We have suicide, a high incidence of suicide. And part of it is because we aren't living our own culture and traditions. And that's the devastation that has come about in the changes of us having to move from our homelands up into alien territory, which is Eagle Butte.
And remember, we all have to continue to have the political will. We have to do it. We have to do it at the table. And I'm glad the elder said that about Sose, because we all learn to speak English eloquently, and we can learn to speak our own languages likewise. I came here on a very personal level. I have never promoted my personal interest in all of the work that came with JTAC. But I was 10 years old, and I wrote my story when they flooded our lands. So I know what it is to be homeless. I know what it is to suffer all the conditions of colonialism that come with the destruction of our lands on the Missouri.
During the latter half of the 20th century, 6 huge Army Corps dam projects sought to control the Sose. With the same ferocity, they sought to control the tribes of the same region 50 years earlier. The dams flooded out the traditional indigenous communities along the river, submerging a subsistence way of life that had existed for centuries.
I think they're more concerned about the recreation areas than they are on any sacred sites that may be on any lands that they have jurisdiction. Oh yeah, through Title VI, they got monies to preserve sacred sites that they manage, but I still don't feel that they recognize the importance of those sites to the Indian peoples.
They took those away from us, and now every day it's a struggle to regain all those things that we lost. And like I said, you want to have a prime example. We can go down right now. Some of the agencies exposed. The cemeteries are exposed. You want to have some good video footage of what the reality is of it? I can take you down there today, tomorrow, and I'll show you remains of our ancestors, people that walked the same ground that we're walking right now. And they've been underwater for a long period of time, but now they're being exposed and they're talking to us. They're telling us something. And it's up to us as young people to look out for our older generation and our future generations to identify what that spiritual awakening is, and that's, by golly, we better get down there and pay attention to our ancestors, because of them we exist today.
Anytime there's land that they take from the Indians, when they're done doing what they have to do, they give it to the states. And the part is recreation is placed above cultural sites, It's just take, for instance, the case of the North Shore up there with the Yankton Sioux.
In May of 2002, on the banks of the Missouri River, construction workers digging a recreational waste dump area unearthed a 3-acre ancestral tribal burial site